Today we have two quotes for our opening words. The first by Adrian Rich. If you are trying to transform a brutalized society into one where people can live in dignity and hope, you begin with the empowering of the most powerless. You build from the ground up. The second by Albert Einstein. The most important human endeavor is the striving for morality in our actions. Our inner balance and even our very existence depend on it. Only morality in our actions can give beauty and dignity to life. Welcome, everyone. On behalf of the entire congregation, I welcome you to the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Shenandoah Valley. I'm Cal Allen, your worship associate for today's service. We gather together with our doubts as well as our convictions, with our fears and our hopes, with our failures and our aspirations, with our sorrows and our joys. Whether you are joining us today for the first time or you've been a member or friend for many years, we are glad you're here. Whatever faiths you have known, if any, whatever your background, whoever you are, whomever you love, however you arrived here, you are welcome. Now, as Mary Haskins comes forward, let us all say together, here or from our homes, the words for lighting our chalice. In the light of truth and in the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to share. And I invite you to join with us as we say our covenant. Love is the spirit of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament. To dwell together in peace, to seek the truth and freedom, and to help our neighbor. To these ends, we covenant one with another. We'll now have a brief time of meditation. Blessed be. Our speaker today is Robert Hurt. Robert has been a member of this church since 1999. He has had many roles at the church over the years, including his current roles as chair of the building committee and of the stewardship committee. Robert started his career in 1973 as an intern at the Virginia State Farm Penitentiary and ended his career as superintendent of the Northwestern Regional Juvenile Detention Center. Prior to serving at the Regional Detention Center, Robert was director of the Shelter Care Program in Alexandria and associate director of the Northern Virginia Juvenile Detention Center. His first job after graduating from Virginia Commonwealth University was deputy sheriff in Arlington, Virginia. Since his retirement in 2005, he has served in various paid and volunteer roles with the ARC of Northern Shenandoah Valley and the ARC of Virginia. He has worked at the Visitor Center in Winchester and currently teaches a monthly class on managing behavioral crisis for folks that work with individuals with intellectual and/or developmental disabilities. In a winter, he can be found in various locations wearing a red suit and spreading the spirit of the season. Robert and Lena met while working at the detention home in Alexandria. They have been married 40 years and live in Cross Junction at Lake Holiday. They have 2 children, Jack and Molly. Jack has autism and currently lives in a group home in Winchester. Molly lives with her husband, Rob, in California. They are the parents of Robert and Lena's beloved 5-year-old grandson.
The words of reflection for this morning are from Max Warren. Our first task in approaching another people, another culture, another religion is to take off our shoes, for the place we are approaching is holy. Else we may find ourselves treading on people's dreams. Have you ever seen a TV show or movie that was about something or someplace you're very familiar with? When you see something portrayed in a movie or TV show that you have personal experience with, it can be frustrating. I know when I see a movie that takes place in DC, it drives me nuts when somehow the Lincoln Memorial is on the way to everywhere, and Dulles Airport is right downtown. They use their poetic license to enhance their story. They don't just change geography, they change the nature and scope of jobs in order to make the story more intriguing or exciting. Has your job ever been portrayed or your field of expertise? For me, I am almost always infuriated by movies about prisons and juvenile facilities. They usually have the settings all wrong. Sometimes jail scenes will have bars that are so wide you could stick your head through them. But more disturbing is how the folks working in those settings are portrayed. You don't see too many stories about lockups that have guards as caring professionals. Usually they are corrupt and or abusive. Imagine how it might feel to have one of those jobs in the sense that this is the way people perceive you. Does this kind of portrayal draw people to the field? Why do folks take those jobs? Look at just about any show about police. The hero is usually a policeman that needs to break the rules and go against what is standard operating procedures to get the job done. There is a real ends justify the means mentality. It's a common theme throughout our entertainment industry. We glorify violence, our heroes are rogues, but when we see it in real time, we're stunned. How could this happen? What message do we send to folks that are interested in doing the work? And who is attracted to these jobs? The personality of the organization, in my observation, is related to what draws people to that job. It's also my experience that people that are successful in those settings follow the rules and behave ethically and adapt sensibly to changing times with the help of supports and training. And finally, the successful folks usually have balance in their life. The job is not what defines them. I did my internship at the Virginia State Farm Penitentiary. The farm was located about halfway between Richmond and Charlottesville. It was a working farm that the inmates worked with supervision. There were also sections of the prison that were classic prison. They had a maximum security unit, cell blocks just like you see on TV with tiers, and dormitories. As an intern, I was exposed to most aspects of the prison. Who worked there? Mostly farmers. They started out supervising on the farm and ended up working inside the units. This was a job. It suited their life. They actually lived in guard barracks during their 10 days on shift, then went home for 4 days to work their farms, usually in Southwest Virginia. They had no idea how to deal with the college students that were there to learn about working there. This was a job for them. Inmates were the bad guys. They couldn't be trusted. The place was loud, all concrete and steel. During the summer when I worked there, it was hot, no air conditioning, just fans. I was paid $3.09 an hour. That works out to $6,427 per year, which was the starting pay for a correctional officer in Virginia in 1973. You were not supposed to respect the prisoners. I was reprimanded for calling an inmate Mr. I was immediately told, just call them by their last name only. We did head counts at the beginning and in the end of each shift. You filled out a form and turned it into the supervisor. There were 2 places to fill out the information. There was a W for the count of white inmates and a C for the count of colored inmates. I scratched out the C and put in a B. That was a no-no as well. I finished my internship after being involved in a terrifying major prison riot in which my alliances drifted back and forth from the prisoners to my coworkers to the state troopers that were called in to quell the riot. That's a whole nother story. We'll have a beer and we'll talk about that one. But the thing that was most significant was the meeting after the riot where we discussed what went wrong, what went right. There was no discussion of inmate issues or the cause of the riot. It was all about safety and making cages to protect the guards. That was my last day. After graduating, I became a deputy sheriff in Arlington, Virginia. This was a completely different environment. When I was a deputy, many of my coworkers had the goal to be police on the street, or whatever reason that they couldn't do that, they became a deputy as the second best thing. You get a uniform, a badge, and you get to carry a gun. There was, however, more empathy for the folks in jail than in prison. For one, since it was local, a lot of folks knew the folks locked up. They grew up with them, went to school with them, and sometimes they were related. I had one coworker whose brother was locked up multiple times. This definitely affected how you treat people. If you don't know them, they're these criminals. But it changes when you know them as people first. This gave me a better understanding why community policing is more effective than the traditional model. If you get to know people before they are in crisis, you will deal with them with more empathy and respect. Those relationships are tools that change both people and help diffuse tensions in advance. That creates some balance. When I worked booking in the jail, I fingerprinted and processed everyone who was arrested during my shift. Some would get released, some would get locked up, and then I would process them for jail. My experience at the time with Hispanic folks was they were drunk, arrested for DWI, and they had no insurance, and were probably undocumented. At the time, I would have said illegals. Can you imagine how your perceptions could be bent by limited exposure to people? When your contact with a group of people is always negative, it frames your opinions and how you deal with them. If you're a policeman and you work in the projects dealing with gangs and drug dealers, that image is projected to everyone. It happens, and it's probably human nature. I was fortunate to find balance because I worked with some unique folks. I had a life outside the work. I had friends and family and other outside interests. The job was not my identity. I started there as part of a team of 5. We were working the midnight shift. We had one guy who was working nights while going to law school during the day. Another was an English major writing a book on John Gotti. I got to read his chapters as he wrote them, which was kind of exciting on the overnight shift. In the women's quarters, we had a working mother who was by day working on her associate's degree. It was 1974 or 75, and her title was a matron, not a deputy. While I worked there, women became deputies, and there were more opportunities for them to work places other than the women's quarters. The environment was in the process of shifting into a more professional culture. And there was me, the first person hired in the jail with a degree in criminal justice specializing in corrections. I was fortunate to learn under these folks. There was only one frustrated cop in our group, and that was our sergeant. He had his moments, but we often were able to balance him out. One of the more significant lessons that I learned as a deputy, I have carried with me since that time. It was from my lieutenant. He was an ex-Marine. He kind of looked like Jonathan Winters. He was extremely confident and had empathy for inmates, and there was no one better dealing with out-of-control behaviors. He set the tone. He remained calm, had a bit of sense of humor, and did not escalate situations. Individuals that are out of control are looking for someone calm, not someone who is hyper, out of control, and judgmental. I've seen plenty of folks escalate situations because they're not in control. They're not in control of their own physiology. Not Lieutenant Wilkie, he was as steady as could be. He kept other deputies calm with his modeling and helped de-escalate, and if action was needed, it was quick and only enough to control the situation. Later in my career as a supervisor, I modeled Wilkie by staying calm regardless of the situation. It took a conscious effort at first, but after a while, it was natural. It's amazing how one person's behavior can affect others. I found the juvenile setting better fit for my personality and values. In the juvenile setting, the reason folks worked there was because they wanted to work with kids. They had recreation or social service backgrounds. They felt they could make a difference. This created a completely different environment. Relationship and role modeling were the key. There were times in those settings where we had to bend the rules, but we did it transparently and documented it. One example, we had a kid for federal charges that was very serious. We were a predispositional unit holding kids during their trial. This kid was going to be with us for almost a year because of the complications in his case. To make matters worse, he was only 12 years old. The rest of the kids were between 15 and 17. This kid would get in fights daily. We would have to physically restrain him and give him room restriction for the rest of the evening. The older kids in that kind of situation would be placed in their room for 3 days room restriction. But we knew this kid was too young for that kind of approach, so we let him out every morning. We met as a team with our psychiatrist, social worker, teachers, shift supervisors, and try to map out a strategy on how to deal with this kid over the next year. The social worker checked his record. It noted that he had a long history of being abused. Our psychiatrist suggested that this kid may be acting out because he needs physical contact, but the only way he knows how to get it is to act up. We created a plan. We were going to give him hugs. When we came on shift, we would greet him and give him a big hug. He was probably getting 10 to 20 hugs a day. He stopped getting in fights, getting room restriction. The rest of this day, although hyper and under folks' skin at times, he was not fighting. The rules around physical contact had been bent, but we did it in a transparent way. I often say in my behavior management training that I teach, a good idea can become a bad idea if no one knows about it. We promote transparency. If I had decided on my own that this kid needs hugs, and I started giving a hug every night before I locked him in his room, they probably would have called protective services, and it would have probably changed my career path. I came to Winchester in 1997 as the first superintendent of the Northwestern Regional Juvenile Detention Center. Note the difference. It's now a detention center, not a home. The approach to dealing with juveniles got harder. I had the opportunity to design the program and hire the staff for the new facility, but the physical plant was designed and almost completed when I arrived. It was the first juvenile detention center to be directly connected to a jail. We needed an exception to do that due to the requirement to provide sight and sound separation between adults and juveniles. We had to show that we would never we would never allow contact between the two populations. That was a little tricky since the jail was cooking the meals, but we worked that out. Anyway, I was in a community that was looking for a hard feel for its facility. The folks that applied were mostly interested in working with kids. We had many folks from Grafton apply. We had a few apply from the jail and a couple folks from other detention centers in West Virginia where the pay wasn't as good as ours. The one thing they had in common was the desire to work with kids. I feel like we hired a good team. We were able to create a program that blended the community desire for a harder environment with a program that provided needed supports and respect. For example, the living quarters have a jail-like feel to them. The classrooms, however, look like any classroom in any school. In spite of being locked up, we wanted to provide an environment with opportunities for the kids to have success. The schools would often question our grades when we sent them in. They would say, "This person's never gotten good grades. What are you doing over there?" We explained that we control the environment. So our students have study time, they have 3 square meals, they go to bed on time, and we just want to give them that opportunity to succeed. And we hope that the experiences that they get there will carry over when they do go back to school. I've always worked in facilities that were subject to court order placements. We had very little control of who was coming. During the 80s, when there was a severe overcrowding due to the crack episode and start of gang activities, we went to the judges and said, "Look, we don't have room for these folks." Their response was that they were not going to make judicial decisions based on space. That was our problem to deal with that. So we had to be creative. We got creative with our space and with the use of personnel, and we even looked to other facilities that weren't overcrowded to transfer folks to as needed. My point here is that these facilities are barometers of the community system and values. Currently, juvenile facilities are low populations. This is due to more community alternatives and less emphasis on locking up juveniles. Everyone tries to adapt to the changes. For example, locally, they got a contract to hold ICE detainees. Their contract is for court order individuals and is not a contract to hold someone just because they're undocumented. They would have specific criminal charges from a judge. Currently, there is a concern that this contract and the fact that they are holding someone for them. I've talked to Erin Maloney, the superintendent of the Juvenile Detention Center. She informed me that the individual being held was released on bond, where he is waiting for disposition of his court hearing. My experience with these situations is the court or holding authority is not going to release someone because you can't hold them. And if Winchester canceled their contract and asked the individual to be released, he would just be transferred, and the core reason for being held would not be addressed. In this case, the detainee would have been placed in a hotel room with an ICE personnel supervising him one-on-one with no services, versus being held in the detention center where he had Zoom visits with his mom, phone visits with his mother, doctor visits, mental health supports, school, face-to-face visits with his case manager, and he was placed in the general population with everyone else. So, if you're interested in being more involved with juveniles in detention and have expertise or interest you want to share, Erin would love to discuss opportunities to volunteer at the facility, and you can contact me for more information. In my opinion, facilities reflect the issues based on how they are used. The solutions need to occur in the community and the system level that got them there. In closing, hope my rambling made some sense. There are many reasons people work in the field. The reasons affect how they perform. Training and mentoring are the key tools to making folks feel competent and professional. We are always pushing back against the rogue models we see in the news and the entertainment industry. I've seen plenty of bad behaviors personally and, of course, on the news. In my experience, these individuals are in the minority and are held accountable when exposed. They get the headlines, and they add to the poor image of everyone else in the field. We need to deal with system inequalities and systemically flawed cultures on a community level. Again, training, transparency, and accountability are paramount. Please don't stereotype all that work in the field based on our media and entertainment industry's representation. There are lots of folks doing good work. Inherent worth and dignity applies to everyone on all sides of all issues.
If we could get the hang of it entirely, it would take too long, entirely too long. Because the world's not black or white entirely, delight or pain, wrong or right entirely. If we could find our happiness entirely in someone else's arms, that fantasy has charms, but in reality there is no road that is right entirely. In reality there is no road that is right entirely.
As Mary extinguishes the flame, let us say together here and from our homes the words for extinguishing our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of our community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again. Before closing words from Robert and our postlude music, I have two announcements. The purpose of the church is to encourage all who gather to grow more generous in spirit and in action. We hope you will consider making an offering after today's service through our webpage, uuShenandoah.org. This will allow us to exercise that generosity of spirit for this self-supporting church and its many ministries, which continue while we're not able to be physically together. And second, we invite you to join our church community at noon at our virtual post-service gathering for joys and concerns, followed by our coffee hour conversations in smaller breakout groups. The Zoom link is found in your UUCSB email. Thank you for joining us today.
Our closing words are from Sun Magazine, August 2021, by Ellen DeGeneres. The problem with labels is they lead to stereotypes, and stereotypes lead to generalizations, and generalizations lead to assumptions, and assumptions leads back to stereotypes. It's a vicious cycle. And after you go round and round a bunch of times, in the end you're believing that all vegans eat cabbage and all gay people love musicals.